Hello and welcome to Horns of Dilemma, the podcast of the Texas National Security Review, TNSR. I'm Doyle Hodges, Executive Editor of TNSR. This week's episode of Horns is a little bit different in that it gets into some nitty-gritty technical details. Some listeners might be wondering why they're listening to a detailed discussion of cloud cybersecurity. And yet, as we take a look at the release of the Pandora Papers, the latest leak of information from banking with implications for international politics, international finance, and high-profile figures, in the wake of the Panama Papers, a similar release, and also taking a look at issues identified by James Shires in his article in Volume 3, Issue 4 of Texas National Security Review about hack and leak operations, we realize that an understanding of the nuts and bolts of cybersecurity is essential to also understanding international security and how it is that information is passed as a commodity and weaponized in our modern digital age. At this week's Horns, we hear from Cristina Murillo, an expert in cybersecurity who has worked at Microsoft, Morgan Stanley, and Fitch Ratings. She discusses misconceptions related to cloud security and the importance of both providers and customers sharing responsibility in ensuring cloud security. Murillo emphasizes that customers should do due diligence when evaluating the types of cloud services they want to purchase. And that helps us to understand how it is and why it is that even prominent organizations with an interest in secrecy and privacy can result in the types of leaks that we've seen that shape international security events. The talk is hosted by Wendy Nather, a senior cybersecurity fellow at the Strauss Center, and was hosted by the Strauss Center at the University of Texas, Austin. Let's listen in.
My name is Wendy Nather. I'm a senior cybersecurity fellow here at the Strauss Center, and I want to welcome you to today's event. And I want to introduce you all to our speaker today, Cristina Murillo. And I didn't get that right. I'm sorry, Cristina. I'm going to keep trying.
Did. Perfect.
It's the least I can do. Let me start by telling you a little bit more about Cristina. Cristina is an information security and cybersecurity and technology leader and author with an extensive background in enterprise security deployments and migrations to the cloud. In her current role at TriMark Security, she leads the Cloud Security Assessment Service for Microsoft Cloud Services, including Azure Active Directory and Microsoft 365. As a strategic thinker who thrives on solving complex problems, her experience has taken her to companies such as Microsoft, Morgan Stanley, and Fitch Ratings. She has also worked on partnerships with organizations such as IBM. In 2020, Cristina signed on to work on an information security book with O'Reilly Media. This book, which is called 97 Things Every Information Security Professional Should Know, will be out this fall, and in fact, part of it's out right now. By demystifying security and technology, she hopes to make security accessible, approachable, and digestible with the overarching goal of keeping people and organizations safe and secure. And you can learn more about her and her work at www.cristinamurillo.com. So let me get started with Cristina and ask her, as a professional, how did you get into cloud security and what adjustments did you have to make in your approach to cybersecurity as a result? What did you learn about cloud?
So the first thing I will say is that it's completely different than what we know about enterprise and being on premise, right? It's not, it's not the old days of like firewalls and routers and switches. That's not the focus. I got into cloud security because I began working at Microsoft. Prior to working at Microsoft, I was at Morgan Stanley as part of their enterprise information security team. And while they were, this was like the early days of cloud, it wasn't as popular, at least public cloud. They were migrating. I wasn't part of that project. And then when I got the role at Microsoft, that's when I was kind of exposed to, cloud microservices or just products, security capabilities, Azure Active Directory. And then that's when I started learning like the terminology. Pretty much by brute force. Like I had to in order to kind of keep up and understand what everyone was talking about. But thankfully, because of my enterprise experience, I was able to kind of not do one-to-one match, but understand, a little bit more about the differences and why folks struggle with it. So I learned by accident, I guess.
Well, you learn by learning, which is
Yeah.
how we end up doing a lot of this stuff here. Nothing is written down, but you kind of went from 0 to 60 going straight into Microsoft and learning about cloud.
Yeah.
How intense was that?
That was super intense. I mean, the good thing is that at Microsoft, we get like free credits to Azure. So we're able to like stand up an environment. We can download like configured VMs or configure our own VMs and connect it to the cloud. So kind of producing like or reproducing like a production environment and migrating over like our identities into the cloud. So there was a lot of hands-on, which I'm a hands-on and visual learner. I don't memorize, or I cannot memorize definitions or terminology or anything like that. Like I need to actually do it to learn it. So that was super, super important. And because, I sat in engineering, I got firsthand exposure to a lot of the products before our customers did. So I was able to kind of poke around, play around, configure, mess it up, break things in advance. But it was fierce. It was fierce. Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest assumptions about cybersecurity in the cloud that just aren't true, or that are more complicated than you'd think?
The notion of like the cloud is just someone else's computer.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, kind of, but you're still responsible for the data that exists on that person's or that entity's computer, right? So I think one of the assumptions is that, oh, it's just like enterprise, right? It's just like there's a one-to-one match. I mean, if I know enterprise security and I've been in IT for 25 years, I automatically know the cloud. No, not really. It's a little bit of a different ball game. Even if some of the terminology and some of like the infrastructure stuff is the same, it's just a different beast. So I think that's one misconception. The second one is that cloud is safer, right? Oh, if I'm in the cloud, if I have my stuff in the cloud, I can't get hacked, right? Because Microsoft, AWS and Google, they will protect everything. That's also not true, right? And then I think the third misconception is that, well, if I have my stuff in the cloud as a company, then it's, the company's responsibility or the provider's responsibility. They're responsible for protecting everything, right? And that's not true, right? Because there's something called the shared responsibility model, which is different for each cloud provider, but it really outlines what they are responsible for as far as the infrastructure and what part you as the customer are responsible for. So I think that a lot of folks don't really do their due diligence and just think, oh yeah, we're just going to lift and shift and forget about it. And that's how we run into a lot of problems. And then I think the fourth one, just to add a bonus one, is that it's easy or it's easier. And that is not necessarily true, right? There's still there are a lot of knobs and switches that you need to know how to configure, and that you need to know that exists in order to stay safe, right? Your stuff is pretty much out in the open, so to speak. It's not behind a firewall anymore. So you need to do a little bit more work to protect it, or to protect access to it.
Yeah, all of that. I was just talking with somebody at a really large bank the other day, and he was discussing how like you, he was mentioning that people who have been in IT for a really long time, 25, 30 years or more, are not necessarily ready to, make the same cybersecurity decisions for cloud, that they're not really cloud literate. I would say that, for people in networking, for people who are focused on operating systems, anybody who, run databases, it's all different enough in the cloud that no matter, even if you're not part of the cloud team when you are rolling something out, you have to make sure that those other people are trained in the cloud so that they don't make mistakes that are going to come back and bite them later. Is that something that you've experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think right now there's a really huge disconnect with folks that have the kind of hands-on experience, like cloud experience. So there's always, there are a lot more MSPs and CSPs, obviously, because there are more people folks or companies that are migrating to the cloud than employees or like professionals that can help support. So that's critical. What I do know is that folks who do have 20, 25 years experience are 100% able to learn all of this stuff, right? And I think that, I'm including myself here, I think we come with that knowledge and like the prior experience and knowledge that it's easier, I think, for us to capture, right? As opposed to, I mean, it depends how flexible you are and how open you are, right? If you're one of these, we've always done it this way and this is the way it needs to be done, then it's going to be a little bit more challenging for you, right? Because you have to kind of let go of that mentality. Now, if you're more flexible and willing to learn different ways, right? Then yeah, you can absolutely learn it, but you just have to let go of like, oh no, we're just going to do it this way because that's how I've done it for 25 years. And I know more than you because I'm, what we call here an OG, right? It doesn't work that way.
I was going to say boomer. Oh.
Yeah. Oh, oops.
Well, that's maybe that's just me. Sorry.
Yeah, I think everyone has the potential to learn. It's just a little bit, it's just a mindset shift. And you do have to, hit the books again, right? And get hands-on again if you really want to understand it. The good thing is that a lot of the foundational basics are still important, right? So if you know networking, you're coming in with an advantage. If you know, routing and switching or anything like that, you are coming in with an advantage because I think the skills are translatable.
So from your perspective, what are the biggest gaps in cloud security that enterprises can't or don't know how to handle?
I think it's the knowledge gap, right? At least this is what I've seen so far. It's the thing where, it's for a lot of companies, they're finally moving towards cloud. For the past, I think the pandemic forced a lot of companies to move quicker. Prior to the pandemic, what I was noticing when I was visiting a lot of these like Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 customers was that they were really hesitant, right? And it was primarily because they've been used to this, let's sit behind a firewall, we're going to protect everything in our environment. And they were used to this control, right? But that doesn't really scale as well. So they were taking their time and not really moving production workloads into the cloud because of this fear. And then also because they didn't really have folks on hand that knew or know the cloud, right? Or know each cloud provider or have a lot of extensive hands-on experience. So now with COVID, or just with the pandemic in 2020 and with the remote workforce, I think more companies had to kind of like just run towards it. And I think that is potentially going to expose a lot of organizations, right? Because now we have to protect against more threats, and one of them being misconfiguration in the cloud. That's a really critical one because of the lack of knowledge and understanding. So it's something that we all need to kind of work towards and help.
Absolutely. I remember one ransomware incident that happened with the state of Colorado with their Department of Transportation. And what happened, how the attacker got in and was able to deploy the ransomware, is that an administrator created a cloud instance, and it was just supposed to be temporary. It was just, for some project that they were working on, and they had joined it to their domain. To their Active Directory domain, but they didn't bother doing a lot of the additional configurations that you would do if you were going to keep that instance around. And they set a weak password. And as soon as they had gotten it up, I think there were brute force attacks trying to guess the password that went on for like 2 days. And finally, they guessed the password. They got in, and because it was joined to the domain, they were able to move laterally into the Department of Transportation's environment, plant the ransomware. And you can actually read a lot of details about that breach. They were very good at being, open about the details. They had to bring in the National Guard to help with the response because it really turned into a huge event, weeks and weeks and weeks of downtime and recovery, and all because they felt like something was temporary because it was in the cloud, and therefore they didn't treat it seriously, but they treated it the same way they would treat the rest of their on-premises enterprise infrastructure and made it trusted by joining it to the domain.
We see this often.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. But what they say, like, no one incident goes to waste or whatever, something like that. Hopefully they learned from this, and other organizations will learn from it as well. But yeah, you basically cannot set it and forget it. because that one little mistake can cause a tornado. Yeah.
So how do enterprises deal with this? Because it seems like there's so much room for error and
Yeah.
there's so much room for mistakes, and there is a learning curve for everybody
Yeah.
who has to move into the cloud. From a policymaker perspective, what do you think we can and should expect from enterprises who move into the cloud, or from cloud providers? What should they owe their customers?
I mean, I personally believe that they should owe their customers transparency. There are a lot of things, and I think for the most part, most of them do, but I think that things can get a little bit muddy at times, because the focus is on selling, right? On selling the service, on selling more SaaS, on selling more products. Now it's selling security, security capabilities. And a lot of customers decide that, oh, well, that's like a best of suite thing or best of breed thing. So I'm just going to purchase it. I don't know anything about it. I'm just going to purchase it. So there's like this pressure involved, right? And I think that there should continue to be the shared responsibility. I think the vendors have a responsibility to be super transparent and not to oversell stuff that customers don't really need, right? I see this a lot. And then from a company perspective, like whether it's a CISO or whoever's purchasing software for the company, it's like do a little bit more due diligence. I understand people are pressed for time, but a little bit of due diligence does goes a long way, right? Like, don't just purchase the SaaS product because it's the latest and greatest cool thing. Really, negotiate support, right? A support contract or maybe professional services with the company to help you implement it and make sure that it's configured per best practice, and then make sure that you're getting like yearly assessments, right? To test your configuration. So a lot of the basics, like a lot of the foundations, I think that's important. That still should, that thinking should still transfer over to the cloud, right? Like just because you've now migrated to the cloud doesn't mean that you just like forget, leave it alone. You still need to have governance around it. But yeah, I wouldn't put the onus on one over the other. I think it's both. Unfortunately, because of the state of the world and this pandemic, things have been rushed. People need to move fast or faster now, in order to prepare the workforce at the time. And my hope and my recommendation is that a lot of those companies go back to test what they've configured, right? If you rush through it, then put this on your priority list, right? Like have a yearly assessment, have an audit, hire a company that will go in to take a look at the configuration, at the security configuration, and just highlight what you've missed and what you can tune up. So basically get a tune up, just like we get tune ups in our car. You need yearly tune ups, right? Because another reason is because even if you've done everything correctly, the vendors do make changes. And sometimes they're not going to notify you personally. Sometimes they'll update their documentation, which could be like a one line item on a website that you haven't checked in like 5 months. And that could be it's enabled by default or something like that. So it's important to make sure that you're constantly tuning and checking.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So in your experience, what do cybersecurity vendors struggle with or skip over when it comes to security? Like, for example, when I was involved with a large cloud migration project where we were virtualizing all the systems in 27 state data centers here in the state of Texas and consolidating them into 2 new state data centers. This is about 10 years ago. One of the problems we ran into was when we wanted to get logs from our particular systems, the vendor could not separate ours out from the other agency's logs. And so we just couldn't get those logs. And I would hope that it's gotten better now. But what kind of things are still suboptimal in your view?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're getting better with things like, those like logging tools and seams. But what I noticed is that they're not, when a cloud vendor goes in, they may ask you about your environment, but they're not going to drill into your environment, right? So they don't understand the nuances of your specific environment. They're going to try to solve generic use cases, or maybe one or two of the top use cases for your environment, right? Like, oh, we need to get our identities into the cloud because we need to use Office 365 or something, or Google Workspace or whatever. So they're going to solve for that, right? They don't necessarily understand the rest of your environment. So I think there's a huge gap there, because again, it's all about, the people that come in from the cloud vendor, usually sales folks, right? And they're doing their job, right? They're trying to sell. And, it makes it a little bit tricky, because then it just, everything feels a little bit rushed. And then you go out and deploy something that you really don't have a foundational understanding of, and or that you don't really need, right? This may not have been the solution that you really needed in your environment. So I think it's important, to understand the environment that you're in, right? Whether it's finance or, I don't know, government, right? Like, understand the environment and understand your needs, right? Don't just buy into a product because the vendor says it's cool, or because you want to have a relationship with that vendor, right? Especially if you don't necessarily need it, because you're just exposing yourself to additional risk, right?
I saw a few years ago that there was some vendors were advertising cloud services for industrial control systems. And I thought, oh my God, really? You want to put ICS in the cloud? And I got really scared. Is that really a thing? Is that a thing now?
That's a good question. I'm not really focused on the ICS area, but I wouldn't doubt it. Why not, right? I mean, again, it's all about marketing and sales. And so if there's a need, which, industrial control systems is pretty popular, right? It has been in the news a lot. They're going to try to create something or sell something, for it. Though that's not my space, so I don't have too much experience on that end. But it wouldn't surprise me, to be honest, if there were a solution, right? Hey, let's put ICS systems on public cloud. I don't necessarily think it's possible, because there's a lot of legacy code and legacy hardware, which the cloud doesn't necessarily like as much. But anything is possible these days, Wendy.
Oh boy. Well, thank you, Christina, so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Horns of a Dilemma, and please don't forget to visit our website at tnsr.org.